Hi, today I want to talk about a couple of issues. Um, I have here a sentence. John said, in quotes, I saw Paul, who is your son. And we always have to put who it is. So it's I, in parentheses, John, saw Paul, who is your, in parentheses, David's son. So John's talking to David. Then I repeated this sentence, and then I clicked on Analyze. Now I've made a couple of changes in the first sentence, but I left the second sentence just like it came out from the analyzer. And down here you'll see a couple of differences. So the first sentence, it says, John said, I saw Paul, who is your son. In the second sentence, it says, John said, I saw Paul, who was your son. Now, in the second sentence, I left it the way it came out from the analyzer, and that was using discourse tense for saw. So if I click on features here and I click on C for the second sentence, you'll see it says discourse for the time in the first column. So what I had learned earlier, but I'd forgotten, and is that in direct quotes, we don't use discourse. We use a time feature that indicates the real time. So what I did is I changed it for C here. I'm dragging it over, and now if you look at the third feature listed, it says time earlier today. So I changed from discourse to earlier today. So in a quote, you use what the actual time was, and then it knows when it has an actual time like earlier today, that the be should be interpreted as the literal present. So he still is the son of David. Whereas with discourse, it doesn't work that way. And when you use discourse, the time feature of the verb in the subordinate clause is relative to the time of the verb in the main clause. So it had discourse, which we associate with the past tense, and so the to be in the subordinate clause is the present tense relative to that past tense, and so it becomes was. I saw Paul, who was your son. So the takeaway here is that when you're using direct quotes, don't use the discourse time feature. Use something more specific. There's one other thing that I want to point out is notice in the generated text for the first sentence it says, I saw Paul, comma, who is your son. In the second one it says, I saw Paul, who was your son. There's no comma. And in English, the comma indicates that this is a descriptive clause modifying Paul, which means that from the name Paul, we know who it is, and we're just giving some extra information that it's your son. So David knows that Paul is his son, you see, but in the sentence he's stressing that fact by adding this descriptive clause. In the second sentence, there's no comma, and that indicates that this is a restrictive clause. I saw Paul, who was your son. In other words, it's like, I saw the Paul, who was your son, and there may be other Pauls. So if you want the descriptive sense or meaning, then you have to change the feature of the clause. So here, Paul, and here, I've now made it a descriptive thing modifier. So if I click with feature on that, you see here in the type of the clause in the first column, the fourth item is descriptive, and I've selected that. And I had to change that because originally it had the third possibility, which is restrictive thing modifier. So there are two things worth noting for today, and that's all.